Hey, David Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Procol Harum, and I've had some requests to feature music from this legendary group, and this of course gives me an opportunity to talk about Robin Trower again. I love Robin Trower, so heck yeah, we're going to feature some Procol Harum here. And Procol Harum formed in England in 1967. They named the band after a friend's cat. I had to look that up. I just assumed it meant something mystical or important. You know, like Uriah Heep. I recently featured them in a Chordplay. Uriah Heep named their band after a character from a Charles Dickens novel. I think that was in David Copperfield. But then when I looked up Procol Harum, I just assumed, like, yeah, what's the name mean? And I was like, they named it after a friend's cat? What the meow? So Robin Trower joined Procol Harum in July of 1967, and that was after they released A Whiter Shade of Pale as a single. And of course that blew up. That's their biggest hit and biggest song. And then Trower stepped in, recorded the first album. The American release of that album does have A Whiter Shade of Pale, even though Robin didn't play on that tune, but he did play on the remainder of that album. And then he continued with the band until late 1971, left Procol Harum, started the, Robin Trower band. And seemingly the rest is history, of course. Twice Removed from Yesterday, came out, and then of course Bridge of Sighs, and then Robin was a bona fide guitar superstar. But it was interesting to go back and listen to Procol Harum, and I did make a timeline to kind of show you like when it happened, because I was going through their music and I was like, hey, when does Robin start to emulate and channel some Jimi Hendrix? And I did locate it, so stay tuned. So I did a lot of listening and a lot of research to try to dig this up and figure out exactly when that change started to happen in Robin Trower's music. And in 1970, Procol Harum released an album called Home, and there's a song on that album that distinctly has kind of this like active Hendrix kind of vibe. It also reminds me of Cream a little bit. And that's where it started, because everything before that album and before that song, which we are going to feature that in this episode, you could hear Robin, but he wasn't really doing anything that sounded remotely like Hendrix, just kind of basic chords and some solos and melodies, some riffs and stuff. And then when you get to that Home album in the summer of 70, that's when it started. 71, they released another album that actually had a song that was a tribute to Jimi Hendrix after he'd passed. And then in 1971, he also played Martin Barr's Stratocaster at a Jethro Tull Procol Harum concert. And that's when he kind of fell into the Strat, like, yeah, this is the guitar I've been looking for. Because technically, Robin was playing Gibsons, back in the Procol Harum early years. And then he made that switch to the Strat. Next thing you knew, he was a solo artist, and he was off and running, with the Robin Trower band. So the chord bass and rhythm guitar parts in this episode actually came from 5 Procol Harum-related albums, and that includes 4 Procol Harum albums, and then also the kind of one-off side project Liqourice John Death, which that album actually wasn't released until the 90s, but it was this old kind of buried like outtakes and jams and stuff. And I think I read somewhere they were sound checking in the studio and the engineer recorded their sound check. And after they were done, he was like, man, you guys, that sounded really good. And then they continued to kind of jam and record, and then the next thing they knew, they had this kind of like side project album, and they buried it, and then eventually they unearthed it and released it. That's really interesting, because it's basically 4 members of Procol Harum, including Robin Trower, and it's really raw, bluesy. There's like blues standards and originals and stuff. That's a really interesting, unusual album that I'd never heard of until I started doing the research for this episode. But anyway, here's the image with the album covers where the music in this lesson came from. With the opening, that's the song Whiskey Train, the opening track from the album Home, and that's the song I was talking about during the intro, because if you go along in those early Procol Harum albums, you don't really hear anything like that until you hit the album Home, cue up Whiskey Train, which is the first song, and it's like, aha, there it is, right there. You can kind of hear. It definitely sounds a little bit like Hendrix. It also reminds me of Cream. It also reminds me of ZZ Top, like early ZZ Top too, but like this. Something like that. So we're in A, and it's this busy kind of position shifting riff, and you can hear Robin kind of shifting. If you listen really carefully, you can hear him shift down, and then you can also hear him shift back up again. So for that first part, just think A minor pentatonic right there. And he's grabbing, that C, A to G, and then hopping all the way down to that lower C note, and then going back up that G to A. And then right there you hear him slide off that A note, and that's where he moves down here, and he's kind of playing with this A5. It's like the open A, that fretted A, that fretted C to that A, and then that open G to open G to that fretted A. And then you hear him shift slide into this E note, and he goes right back to the A minor pentatonic riff. Then the verse starts right there, the riff changes, he's doing... And that totally reminds me of early ZZ Top. That sounds like Billy Gibbons, but it's Robin Trower, and he's doing... Right? So like that open A, that fretted C to that A note, and then the open A, open G to that fretted A note. And then a smear bend on this G note. And he's doing that smear bend, fretted A, and then a smear bend on the C to that fretted A right there. And I love how he's hitting the same A, but it's in two different locations with two different smear bends. Right? And go right back to that riff. Now an index finger bend here on the C up to that D and back. And that's a cool riff right there too. And right back to that riff. Now right there, two hits on that D. Do two more. And then you got this riff. Kind of sliding into that D, grab that F, back to that D. Then you kind of smear bending that C into that fretted A again right there, and you want to do that again, so you're doing that D part twice. And then do it again. Like I said, it doesn't sound exactly like Hendrix, but if you start going through, Procol Harum's early albums, you don't really encounter anything remotely like that until you hear Whiskey Train, and that's really cool. Next up's the song Cerdes. This is from the first Procol Harum album, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's something like that. And it's the slow blues, and the bass is doing this. Robin come in with this. So it starts with this kind of simple, like just, it's like 4 notes of a lead right there. Right? That E flat to F, A flat to F. And you do that twice in a row. And then it's F major right there. And then right here, I love that little twist right there. That's technically part of a B flat 7, but it's just this part. So it's like B flat 7 over F. So you're hearing that shared like root note, with both of those chords. So it's definitely catching your ear like, hey, what's going on there? And it's real simple. It's real sparse, just kind of laid back. The piano's grooving, the bass is grooving and stuff. Basic, but I love parts like that. It really fits in the pocket and stuff. Next up's the song Lucille, and this is the Albert Collins Lucille. And this is actually from the Liqourice John Death album. Nothing to get excited about, but I have to admit, I got really excited when I found that album because I was like, what is this? This raw, kind of just guts and all, like bluesy rock album. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And this is that real standard kind of tic-tac, guitar and bass. So real simple here, right? That's basically just outlining a C7 like that. But you're doing it like that. Then hop over a set of strings and do the same thing in F7 right there. It's the same thing, just start right here. Back to C7. Up to G7, do the same thing here. Back to F7. Back to C7. So really simple, but I love riffs like that and those kind of, busy, bluesy bass lines and stuff. The tic-tac, guitar and bass parts. That's cool. Next up's the riff from the song Wellie, and this is also from the Liqourice John Death album, and this was an original from that group, even though it technically really wasn't a band. It was really just Procol Harum jamming, but like this. Basic stuff here. We're in B flat, and this reminds me of a lot of stuff you'll hear Trower do as a solo artist. Think of like Two Rolling Stones and some of those songs, and you'll hear that that kind of trilled like between the minor and major third, and that's what he's doing here. So right there, he's walking up single notes here, thumb wrap on the root note there, the B flat. And then you're basically like barring right there. And then there's like a single hammer-on pull-off right there. It's kind of like a little taste of things that Robin Trower would do later, of course in the 70s. Those little kind of hammer-ons and partial chords and bluesy riffs like that. It's really cool. Next up's the riff from the song Juicy John Pink. This came from the Procol Harum album A Salty Dog, and it's this bluesy riff like this. like that. So we're doing this open position kind of melodic thing, like that. A hammer on pull off there, that open G, A, back to that G. And there's two low E's open, the high E open, and then you're sliding that D into that E on the B string. With some vibrato like that. And then you just repeat that riff. Right there it goes to A, and now we're going to shift slide this B into that C sharp with the open A string there, like that, and then you hear the open A some more, and then you're hearing like that, and it goes right back to that E riff right there. So we're doing right back to the now we're moving to the 5 chord B right there, and he's doing so there's an interesting flow. I like the fact that it's kind of outlining a blues progression, but then you're also playing fills and licks and stuff. And it's all implied chords, but that's really cool. Next up's the riff from the song Memorial Drive. This came from the Procol Harum album Broken Barricades, which was the last one that Trower appeared on until much later, because that's the album when he left the band and became a solo artist, like right after Broken Barricades. And this is cool, like this. Like that. So it's playful and bouncy, and it's kind of jumping around. And this first part, he's basically outlining an octave, A to B, but like that. And then 2 B5 power chords, like that. Right there, shift slide into that F sharp, and then pick up that A to B again. Back to the B root note, and then 2 B power chords. Right? You distinctly hear him hit that. And then single notes right there, that F sharp E to that D note. And he's adding vibrato on the E and D. And there's 3 B power chords right there, and you do the whole thing again. So slowly. And you do all that again. Okay, last but not least is the Song for a Dreamer. This came from the album Broken Barricades as well. And this was Procol Harum and Robin Trower's tribute to Jimi Hendrix. Keep in mind, Jimi died in September of 1970. This song appeared on the album Broken Barricades like in spring of 71, like April or something. So a few months, after he died. But this was their tribute, and this is really cool, like this. Robin kind of goes into like a little bit of a solo right there. But I just wanted to grab at least like that opening part, because that's what it sounds like. I don't actually know if Robin played all those chords I just played, but that's what I'm hearing, like the guitar and the bass and the keys and stuff. It's real moody. Definitely the intro is doing this. There's a E minor, and you're strumming these chords backward like that. And then there's an E minor major 7 like that. And then you're moving that D sharp down to a D. Now it's just E minor 7 like that. And then E minor 6 like that. So that's really interesting. It's got that like mysterious spy kind of sound to it. And then now when that runs its course, then you just hear C major down here. And then you hear, and I'm not really sure if the guitar is doing that, but you hear it in there. And then you hear a little part of C major move into E major. Like that. And that's really tasty in there. And then so right there, after you do the C to E slide, then you're hearing this G sharp A to B, and then you hear it go to B major, and then so it's like a little part of B major, you're playing with that A, going back to that B note, and then it ends up on E major again right there, and then you hear Robin do like that final kind of big slide in there, that G sharp to C sharp to B, and then he goes off like in a totally different direction after that. But when I heard that opening sequence of chords and stuff, I was like, yeah, we're totally hitting that, because it's a Hendrix tribute for one thing, and there's tons of interesting things happening in there. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of Procol Harum. And like I've said multiple times in this episode, I love Robin Trower. I'm a huge fan. The band continued after Robin left and became a solo artist. And I'm sorry, I only featured music from the Robin Trower era. That's how big of a fan I am. I can't even see beyond, when Robin Trower, left the group. And I definitely should maybe like kind of check out some of their additional albums. I know they had some great stuff after Robin left, but I don't know. I just saw the request. I saw requests for more Robin Trower. I recently did feature Trower, I think like a part 2 of his Chordplay. I guess that was like a month or so ago. And I'm still like feeding on Robin Trower, where it's like, yeah, show me some more licks and riffs and stuff, because I love his playing for sure. He's a legend. And it was cool to kind of check out some of this Procol Harum music, kind of discover and search for like the Hendrix sounds and influences and stuff. Really cool stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.